Hey everyone, welcome to Youth Bombs. I'm Craig,
I'm Holden.
I am Coleman.
and we're the voice of young conservatives in Alachua County. Tragedy strikes this week with Hurricane Helene. What have your experiences been living here in Florida in Gainesville with the hurricane?
Well, okay, so my story has been, I think I've had it much better than like some other people, but my power goes out 10 p.m. Thursday night, and I'm like just submitting an application for a job, and I'm like, all right, well, now what? So I'm just thinking I'm not gonna get anything done, being productive at all. So I'm just gonna go over to my friend's house, and then we just had like a little hurricane party where do mixed drinks and then like mafia howling at the sky. So yeah, that was fun. And then of course the difficult part, I guess, is like, well, I don't have air conditioning, right? So it becomes very difficult to sleep, which sucks. And then my refrigerator stops working as well. But so I had to like get an extension cord. So like the first thing was we waited over almost 24 hours for my unit to have power back, but not our rooms. So then I had to get an extension cord to just get my fridge get my fridge powered up again. And then we finally get power back on Saturday, which was yesterday. That was sort of my story. But I've seen people much worse off of like trees on people's cars, on people's houses. I shouldn't be laughing, but yeah, it was not a good time. But the angle I guess we're taking today is like, the response. But I think we'll get to that in a moment. Holden, I'm curious, how did you fare? You survive?
Oh yeah, I was cool.
All right.
I pretty much the same. It went out at around 10 o'clock, and I was up late, and it was still off. But then it came back on at like 7 in the morning.
Oh wow!
Yeah,
you got it much faster there.
It was off at like 10, so it wasn't that bad.
Okay.
At all.
Great.
Yeah.
Craig, what was your experience?
Yeah, was playing some games late at night, 9:45 or so not the latest, but either way, power went out around then, and then woke up, wasn't able to work Friday because power was still out in the morning. The mobile network was barely working, like it was really on and off. I was getting 1 bar of 4G LTE, and then it would shut off, and it was just a mess. So it was hard to contact work even. But I went out to Palm Coast because it got to 1 p.m. and I still didn't have power. And then I came back that night. Power was back, but then went to bed. 4 a.m. comes, and I get an email. Power went out again. So for hours and hours and hours, no power that day. So probably going to have to throw stuff out from the fridge, unfortunately.
Do you have power back now?
I do, fortunately.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. Hopefully everyone in Gainesville has power back. I imagine that to be the case, but if anyone out there doesn't, I hope it comes back for you soon.
I think you just talked with a friend though who like still sleeping on like a mattress and like doesn't have power.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
fair point. So
yeah, it's still slow as far as like getting everyone back up to speed. So we'll just hope for the best for them. But now, as far as like the broader conversation we'll address in this segment, we're gonna ask government versus volunteer altruism in the midst of disaster. So I guess like for instance, Ron DeSantis, as you said, Holden, was like now asking for more money to help like assist in like the relief effort. But now we're like, okay, should we expect the government to help in the midst of tragedy or what? I mean, Holden, what are your contentions here?
Well, because we have public schools, public roads, public national parks, all this public property, the government's responsibility is to clean it up now. They're responsible for the roads. They're responsible for all the parks and this stuff. So they have to use taxpayer money to fix this stuff. If it was privately owned, then they would just pass that on to their customers, just like businesses do.
Yeah.
So because we have a huge government that's controlling all this stuff. It costs huge amounts of taxpayer money to fix this, and it's way less efficient than what the private sector would be, of course. So, I mean, when you enlarge government, when you make government larger, you're then going to need more government to fix more problems that it creates. And not that the government created the storm, but it's just when inevitably something happens, the government, of course, is just going to be much more lousy at fixing the problem than people with private property would. If it was a privately owned road, they just pass it on to their customers. This happened, and they have to fix the road, or else no one uses it. And whatever the case may be, you have to fix the park, or else nobody goes there. Whatever, so, and just make it all privately owned. Like your property, I do lawns. There's a bunch of crap everywhere now. Storm. I take care of it. That's what they hire me for, right?
Yeah.
So that's what they call me for. So you just gotta make it privately owned, and people will take care of their property. That's their responsibility to have insurance. So this stuff happens. You just gotta be prepared.
What do you want to see privatized, and what would you like to see stay public?
I mean, the only thing that should be public is the only thing that's public is police force, military, and court system to enforce law. That's it. So everything else should be privatized. And so the government shouldn't own any of the land. They shouldn't own any of the roads, or they shouldn't own any of the parks, whatever. So just get rid of that, and then you just have way lower taxes, and you have much more efficient allocation of resources.
Okay, interesting. I think that you potentially could have better allocation of resources in that manner, because there's a personal and financial interest in fixing up your own property. At the same time, I think that the government has some responsibility in at least maintaining its own property and rescuing people, making sure that, people aren't stranded or drowning or what have you. So I think there's room for both. I'm seeing locally strong private response from the churches, but then also the government has intervened rather strongly in securing the electrical substation. So definitely seeing a mix of things.
Yeah, I mean, the churches are making a response still, even with this massive government we have today. Could you imagine if we didn't? I mean, they would be taking even more action, and all the stuff would be privately owned. It would be taken care of. It's hard to defend the government. They suck.
Yeah.
They're inefficient. They literally tax people at the threat of violence, and they suck at what they do. Like, it's just hard to defend the government. Like, they're just going to be inefficient, and it's just the way it is. I mean, just privatize this stuff. This is not the role of the government. We got to get it out of it. I just looked the other day. Alachua County is spending collecting $800 million, over $800 million in taxes.
Yeah.
This is theft. I'm sorry, this is theft. Like, there's no reason that Alachua County should be collecting that much money. And of course, now we're getting federal. I mean, DeSantis is asking for federal money because all this stuff that's federally owned needs to be cleaned up. And so it's just more taxes, bigger budget deficits. It's all a disaster. So get rid of the government from all these things that they were never supposed to do. Power, electricity, it would be much better taken care of, and is much better taken care of by the private sector. In many circumstances, it's taken care of by the private sector. Much more efficient, much better. So just privatize this stuff.
The roads and electricity are in the private sector. Do we have a proof of concept of that?
Yeah, there's plenty of privately owned roads. There's one in Canada. There's one in Italy. There's still in the United States. There's a road called River Ridge Road that's privately owned. They all work fine. And it's been tried many times in history. And we still, even today, have private utility companies in the United States that work fine, much better, much cheaper, but it's just, and higher quality. But it's just, we'll have the government do this because I guess they do it, right? We'll have government do the roads because I guess that's just what they do.
Free markets are more efficient. But now, I think I've addressed this before. It's like convincing the public otherwise. Now, like, for instance, like if a family is like their home gets like wrecked or they lost power, what have you, and they're like their food's going bad in the fridge, and then they're citizens of I could even just start of the state of Florida, and like, well, I elected you, Mr. Ron DeSantis, Rick Scott, Marco Rubio, to like help me in the midst of like these disasters. So, and I pay. Well, I guess ideally, even we already have like taxes, for instance. Like, I'm paying you tax dollars to help me, but that let's say even like scratch out hypothetically we did not have a tax system, and we're just like they are citizens of this nation, or excuse me, we'll shrink it to the state. They're citizens of the state, and like they believe that okay, the state is obliged to protect me, not just from like foreign dangers or domestic dangers, but like to help me in the midst of tragedy. Like, and then how do we say, okay, are they just do we just expect them to not expect like the state to help them in the midst of that tragedy, or like say, concede that the government can only do so much. I should really be like going to my church. You see what I'm getting at here?
Yeah, I mean, it's just collectivism versus individualism.
Okay.
We need the government for the greater good of the greater number.
Okay.
Or it's the responsibility of the individual.
Okay. Craig, what do you think?
Yeah, you can also look at how do you define tragedy. I mean, certainly this hurricane was a tragedy, but you can continue to expand tragedy and expand what you think the government should do. Like, do we want bread lines like Bernie does? No. So
Yeah.
you look at Venezuela, you look at North Korea, you look at these socialist countries, it's not working out. The goods are publicly owned and it's a complete failure. So the more you do that, generally speaking, the worse outcomes you're going to have.
The question I'm getting at here is like, to what extent should the people expect the government to help them?
Oh, yeah, that's what I was going to say. So, I mean, just because something's a tragedy doesn't mean the government should come in. There's going to be natural disasters that happen all the time.
Yes.
It's just if there's another human being that is, or human beings, that is inflicting violence on you or threatening your property rights, that's when the government steps in. If they're trying to steal money from you that you've earned in the free market, that's when the government steps in. If someone is trying to violently hurt you in some way, for no apparent reason, not out of self-defense, that's when the government steps in.
Okay.
If it's a natural disaster, that's not where the government steps in. That's your property, your responsibility. You should have insurance. If you don't, that's your decision. You suffer the consequences. Individualism versus collectivism.
What about what is sometimes brought up in the tragedy of the commons, where you may have an issue that is privately owned or on private property, but it affects the people around them?
I mean, to some degree, everything you're going to do is going to affect people around you. Whether or not you study a skill, would it be better for society if you studied a skill and made yourself more valuable? Yeah, it would be, and that's going to affect people around you. But does that mean the government should make a law that says you have to do X, Y, Z? Of course not. So it's up to the individual through praxeology, human action, to decide what is it that I want to do, and we go from there. I mean, there's tons of things that are going to affect your neighbor. And the question is, should we, does that mean the government should be step in to do that? My answer is, if it's not a violent crime, or you're not, stealing from someone or destroying property rights, then of course not. The government shouldn't be in there to do that. I mean, I could say it's not like, can I say you can't lie to your wife? Should I pass a law that says you cannot lie to your wife, or you cannot eat cake, or you cannot do X, Y, Z? Of course not.
Mm-hmm.
No, generally speaking, that makes sense. But I also see, for example, if a tree falls on your house, I think there is an element where the government should be able to say, no, like that building is unsafe for occupation. You can't live there. You have to fix it.
Well, why would nobody would, if no one's going to live there, right? Like, if it's not livable, then no one's going to live there. It's that simple.
Right, but I mean, you might have someone who doesn't want to fix their property, or the homeless, say, want to occupy that property, and it's like, no, like, we can't have a building that's about to collapse, especially given that it could harm the property of other people. It could damage the building next to it.
Yeah, so this is you take risks as an individual. There are times where there could be bad things that happen. Are you going to move out of there? What are you going to do? You take a risk as an individual. If there's someone beside you, they could shoot you at any moment. They could not do something, and you just have to take in those risks. If you don't want to live there, there's going to be HOAs that take care of that stuff. You could move to a neighborhood out of voluntary choice. You could go somewhere else if that's what you want. It's up to you to decide what you want, not the government. So, yeah, I mean, nobody's forcing you to live there. If you want to move because you feel you feel like this is not a good situation, then go on your own volition. It's your choice. So yeah, I mean, the government has no role there whatsoever. You just got to get it out of there. I mean, you could go to your neighbor and be like, "Hey, bro, this isn't a good idea." But I mean, if they don't listen, then you should move.
Interesting. What do you think?
Like in closing, that I'm glad Ron DeSantis is doing what he can, and even within the dialectic that we don't necessarily agree with, or the establishment that we don't necessarily agree with, he's doing what he can to help people in the midst of this tragedy, and I'm glad people are starting to get their power back and get back in shape. But that being said, I think we got some good ideas out of this conversation, and that we can take it forward for the future reference.
Absolutely.
So that being said, thank you all so much for watching Youth Bombs. Go like, comment, share the video, and we are on YouTube and Rumble. And then
If you'd like to reach out to us, feel free at youthbombs@alachiorepublicans.com. Thanks so much, everyone.
Bye bye.